Today, we call it World War One. To that generation, it was usually referred to as the Great War. Why? Perhaps because it was the greatest catastrophe in human history up to that point. Thanks a lot, Europe. There are other cutesy little names for it. The war to end all wars. Isn't that just precious? Maybe we should consult with Plato, who noted, "Only the dead have seen the end of war." And this little jewel is my personal favorite: the war to make the world safe for bureaucracy. Oops, how clumsy of me. That would, of course, be democracy. Oh, yeah. When World War II came along, they just gave up on the silly little names and started numbering them. Now, there's a frightening thought. World War One is, in my opinion, the most useless waste of American lives and treasure we have ever engaged in. When the greatest president in American history, George Washington, urged us to stay out of foreign entanglements, this would have surely been at the top of the list. It was a typical European slugfest between continental powers. The primary reason for us to become involved was to see to it that the Allies, Britain, France, and Russia, won so that the bankers and investors in New York did not lose too much money. The secondary benefit was to the progressive regime of Woodrow. He kept us out of war. Wilson. He kept us out just long enough to get reelected, whereupon he promptly plunged us into it. This war was a tremendous crisis. And what do we know about progressives and crisis? Never forget the words of Barack Hussein Obama's former chief of staff, Rahm Emanuel, who said, "Never let a good crisis go to waste. It allows you, government types, to do things you couldn't ordinarily do." The Wilson reign of error took full advantage of the war to increase government power and crush freedom to win the war. Then as now, freedom lost is rarely ever regained. The slaughter on the Western Front was unparalleled in human history. In the Battle of the Somme in 1916, the British lost almost 20,000 dead on the first day. It was the most men lost in one day in the long, blood-soaked history of the British military. Let that one sink in. In the days leading up to it, there were over 1,000,000 huge artillery shells raining down on the trenches, preparing for the upcoming battle. The terrified soldiers awaiting their fate to be mowed down by entrenched machine gun fire in the next big push that is sure to achieve a breakthrough, could do nothing but burrow deeper into the ground, tell the thousands of rats they shared their quarters with to move over and wait. When the shelling stopped, everyone knew it was time for the party. The Germans scrambled up from their deep bunkers and set up their Maxim guns in concrete pillboxes. At the prescribed time, 7:30 a.m., whistles blew all up and down the line, and the Brits began pouring out of the trenches, going over the top, a term we still use today. Many still had their feet on the ladders when their stout young bodies were ripped to shreds by murderous machine gun bullets. If you bother to contemplate the 4 years of mindless slaughter brought to you by the enlightened Europeans, consider this. In this, as in all wars, every single casualty figure was someone's son, brother, friend, or father. Back in America, there were many loud voices beating the drums to go and join the party. The warmonger, progressive Teddy Roosevelt was one of the loudest. He lost his son Kermit, a pilot, in the carnage. Careful what you wish for, Teddy. We couldn't stand by and let Europe have all the fun, but the warmongers had a problem. They had to sell this bloodbath to Mom and Pop Main Street. They had to push something other than protecting Wall Street, of course. So the two biggest excuses were the sinking of the passenger ship Lusitania and the interception of the Zimmerman Telegraph. The Zimmerman Telegraph is hardly worth mentioning, but the Lusitania as an excuse for war is very disturbing. The ship boarded in New York City. It was bound for England. It had hundreds of passengers. It also had tons of munitions in the hold. In 1915, we were neutral. And the Germans had a consulate in New York. They warned everyone, do not board this ship. The ship is sailing into a war zone. On May 7, 1915, just off the Irish coast, a German U-boat sent it to the bottom. Of the 1,198 dead, 128 were Americans who ignored this deadly warning. It was a great propaganda coup for our old buddies, the Brits. It was a win-win for them. If it got through, they got their war material. If it didn't, they get to blame the evil Hun for inhuman barbarity. Shame on those awful Germans. Please note, in World War I, we were fighting the Germans, but they were not the Nazis of World War II. On April 2nd, 1917, Wilson went before Congress and asked for a declaration of war. He got his wish. It took about a year to get millions of doughboys trained, equipped, and deployed into the slaughter. The real fighting for the Americans lasted around 6 months. Care to guess how many sons, brothers, friends, and fathers we lost in those 6 months? Oh, go ahead. Give it a shot. 117,000. Let me spell that out. 117,000. Now, there are other numbers given, but the most accepted is the 117,000. In 6 months of combat, that is twice the number of the Vietnam War, which lasted for 10 years. Although, thank God, the primary combat there was just about 5 years. When casualty figures are given for any conflict, the number consists of dead, wounded, and missing. In World War I, the term missing had a particularly gruesome designation. Many times, a soldier would be in no man's land, that slice of hell between the opposing trench lines, and have an artillery round drop so close to him that he just simply disappeared, vaporized. That would have been merciful compared to another ghastly ending, one 1,000 times worse. To slip into a water-filled shell hole, either by being wounded or just losing your footing on rain-soaked ground. The shell holes in no man's land could be 10 to 12 feet deep, filled with rats gorging on the rotting flesh of those unfortunates who preceded you into eternity. Men who could not be rescued, sometimes for days, sometimes forever. Try to imagine falling into a shell hole, wounded, and can't crawl out. The rats begin to dine on your flesh, especially that tasty wound. Yum. Then it begins to rain. You can't move. You cry out for your friends. You cry out for your mother. You cry out to God, please, please, help me. The water begins to rise. You grow weaker. And then, merciful darkness. A life cut short at 18 or 20 or 25. It is inevitable that there will always be a last man killed in any war. For the Americans, it was 23-year-old Sergeant Henry Gunther of Baltimore, ironically a young man of German descent. He was a sergeant and got busted to private for something he said in a letter that the censors didn't like. They just thought that he was trying to regain lost honor, or who knows. He was killed at 10:58 a.m. on the 11th of November, 1918, 2 minutes before the armistice was to begin. All told, there were almost 3,000 sons, brothers, friends, and fathers who died needlessly on that last day. The armistice was signed just after 5 a.m. in Paris. Word quickly spread up and down the line. There was no excuse for bloodthirsty commanders to allow their men to do anything but hunker in the bunker until 11 a.m. and go home. There were congressional hearings on the matter, but of course nothing came of it. Henry Gunther died in a useless charge of a German machine gun position. The Krauts were trying to wave him off. They had enough of the bloodbath and just wanted it to end. The insanity of the Great War claimed its last drop of blood. 20 years later, long enough to grow a whole new crop of cannon fodder, Europe gave us another Great War. They never seemed to run out of the stuff. Only this time, we had little choice, do we or don't we? When the wolves and other predators stay in their world, we have the luxury of sitting on our deck and watching them. When they come and beat on our door, we must answer it with a 12 gauge. We can sit in the comfort of our comfortable homes and debate, cogitate, and contemplate. What did we do? What do we do? Was it right? Was it wrong? How many angels can dance on the head of a pin? But for the young men who suit up and go to far-flung battlefields, they must trust the old man who sent them. When those people are trustworthy, maybe the sacrifice is easier to bear. Is it? In any case, the young warriors who bear the brunt of the pain and sacrifice brought about by war should always, always be given the honor and respect they so richly deserve. When you lay on your comfortable mattress that you bought down at Mattress Bob's Blowout Memorial Day sale, and when you eat your tasty barbecue at your brother-in-law's cookout, please take a minute and say a prayer for the families of the fallen. Remember that under every single tombstone in a military cemetery is the bones of someone's son, brother, friend, or father, and now daughters. And do consider this: each day, an average of 22 former military personnel, soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, take their own lives. Dear God.